Hi everybody, my presentation today is about Scala, how we use Scala.js to be a simple entry point to get people actually onboarded into Scala. We had been using this method at Wiringbits for around a year, and the results has been surprisingly good. So I believe that other companies can actually benefit from this. The reason to, or the motivation to present this is because one of the common complaints about why to not use Scala for development is because the onboarding is pretty complicated and hard. Well, it doesn't have to be, and Scala.js is a ham that more people can take advantage of. I will start by introducing myself and relatively briefly. My role is the principal Scala consultant at Wiringbits. Um, by this, I had been involved as a technical partner and advisor for a little bit more than 10 companies where I helped them to use Scala in a pragmatic way and efficiently, making sure that when they had people that is not very experienced with Scala, they can actually avoid the pitfalls of using Scala because it's a very flexible language. I had been working with Scala for more than 6 years. Three of those I had the pleasure to work with Scala.js. I hope to have visited this before, but I didn't anyway. I am also author of some open source repositories like the Chrome Scala.js template, which is a skeleton for people that want to build Chrome extensions using Scala.js. I'm also the author of the Scala web application template that we use internally at Wiringbits, which is another skeleton for building full stack web applications with Scala and Scala.js. So the agenda for today is that I am going to talk a little bit about the Scala.js so that people that are not very familiar with it can actually understand what I am talking about. I will briefly touch a little bit of the tooling that is involved in Scala.js, and then I will proceed to talk on how we are using Scala.js at Wiringbits. And at last, I will get to the purpose of the presentation, which is talking about the onboarding process at Wiringbits that where we use Scala.js mainly. So let me start with an introduction to Scala.js. If we go and visit the official Scala.js website, we'll read that it is advertised as a safer way for building robust front-end web applications. And because Scala.js provides some key aspects like correctness, performance, interoperability, synchronized editor support, and it also supports Scala 3. We need someone needs to update the website because this is not there, but it supports Scala 3 and it works pretty nicely. I'm going to dive a little bit into some of these details with mostly talking about our experience. And for people that has been working with Scala for some years, they usually have gotten used to a pattern that is pretty common, that you feel that when the code compiles, because sometimes you need to fight a little bit with the compiler, but when the code actually compiles, it is very likely that it actually works. But having this experience at the front end, it's not something that is common. For example, there are languages like ELM that have tried to push for this, but overall in the JavaScript or TypeScript ecosystem, you just don't get to experience this. Well, until you actually try something like Scala.js. In that Scala.js is use Scala, you can actually get to push JavaScript to the boundaries, and then everything else is a Scala, and you can get to experience this, like making 1 or 2 hours of code, making it compile, and getting surprised because everything seems to be working pretty closely to what you are expecting. And in my personal experience, it is hard to go back to JavaScript or TypeScript once you actually experience this, besides all the other nice details that the Scala.js provides. I actually have someone in my team that went back to TypeScript because a customer required urgent help for delivering some milestone, and he was working with TypeScript for a couple of months. This developer used to be a TypeScript developer involved with React, but he has been involved with Scala.js for more than a year. I don't remember the exact time frame, but in any case, after he went back to TypeScript, he got back to me just complaining about how TypeScript does not support all the kind of stuff that Scala.js actually supports, and who he was feeling that there are quite a lot of stuff that can be catched by the compiler, but instead people were relying on runtime errors. So if people like Scala, they will have a hard experience going back. And I have an anecdote to share about this that is surprising, because after the 3 years that I had been working with Scala.js, I cannot actually remember a single time where we had hit a null pointer exception in production. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this because null pointer exceptions do not exist in Scala.js. They do, but it's Scala, the most common way to be used, usually avoids using nulls. And if you do that, null pointer exceptions are pretty rare. So when working with Scala.js, you can adopt this kind of pattern and catch the null pointer exceptions at just at development, because they only occur when you are interacting with the JavaScript layer. And in our experience, like having running several applications in production, I don't really remember. It's a question I had been trying to answer, but I don't remember last time when we saw a null pointer exception in production. And this is only one kind of the errors that you can avoid by using Scala.js. Scala.js has a nice benchmark at the official page. I'm not going to dive into it, but if we get to a simple conclusion, sometimes Scala.js might be a little bit slower than handwritten JavaScript. Sometimes it might be faster, but overall, the difference is not very noticeable for the most common functionality that you are going to implement in a web page. And in our personal experience, we have implemented Scala.js with non-technical customers, and they have shared that they don't feel any difference on how the website behave comparing against the applications they use on the daily basis. So you don't need to have a very technical customers just for selling Scala.js. You can actually sell it to non-technical customers, and the time savings are actually non-negligible, which can help for this. And if we talk about the Scala.js interoperability, I will say that this is pretty similar to how we have interoperability between Java and Scala. You know that in Java, we can invoke, sorry, in Scala, we can invoke any Java function pretty easily. In Scala.js, you can do the same. You can invoke any JavaScript function. You need a facade, but you can invoke any JavaScript function. In Scala, you can use Java libraries, almost any library, and it is going to work. And similarly, in Scala.js, you can consume any JavaScript library. Like I said, you might need a facade, but that's it. And similarly to how exporting code, Scala code, to be invoked from Java could require a little bit of work just to make sure that you have compatible types that actually make sense of the Java ecosystem. When you are exporting Scala.js code, you might need to do a little bit of work for writing a compatibility layer so that JavaScript can invoke it, but it's perfectly doable. So for example, we are not going to return a list of integers from the standard Scala library, but we are going to return, for example, an array, and that's going to work with JavaScript pretty nicely, and it works. And related to this, we had found that it is worth to invest some effort to keep the JavaScript compatibility layer at the application boundaries so that you can write it once, debug it once, and then forget about it, so that you continue using mostly Scala at the whole application. And that's something that it's a little bit of effort that pay off. And related to the tooling, there's something pretty nice about Scala.js. It's because it is just Scala. There is nothing that you cannot use from the Scala standard library. And in the same way, you can benefit from the standard Scala tools. Most of the Scala tools actually work with Scala.js. And besides that, we also have some other nice tools that are targeting Scala.js. For example, Scala typed, it's something that needs more advertising because it's a wonderful tool. For using something like Webpack, we have a Scala.js bundler, but there are even ways to use something like Byte directly without involving a Scala.js bundler. There is also at the UI, I will say the most popular libraries that I have. So one is Laminar, and the another one is Slinky, which is a wrapper for React. But there is also Scala tags, which can be combined with the reactive Scala library from Haoji. And that combination can be a simpler alternative to Laminar. It's something we are using in another project, and it works pretty nicely as well. Just to give you a summary about the Scala tools that are available for Scala.js, I just prepared this small list, and you will likely find most of these tools familiar, or the names. And these are not the only ones. There are so many other tools that are available for Scala.js. You can check Scala decks in order to find which one supports Scala.js, but more mainstream libraries are actually supporting Scala.js right now, build tools, IDEs, or streamings. And what had we tried? It's interesting stories coming. Well, we had written many web applications using Scala.js, which is what actually the Scala.js website advertised for. And when using Scala.js at the front end and Scala.js at the back end, there are quite a lot of potential errors that don't exist anymore. And one reason is because you are sharing code between the backend and the front end. But not only that, we have also used these for writing browser extensions, specifically targeting Firefox and Chrome. This doesn't mean that you cannot write a browser extension for Edge or for Safari. They do, but we haven't personally tried it, and it works. And on browser extensions, Scala.js works super nicely because for the ones that are not familiar with browser extensions, the way they work, it's like yet another microservice architecture where there are many applications between inside the same browser extension, and you need some communication layer that could be pretty similar to network communication layer on the standard web applications. So in this case, having a strongly typed language that helps you with all of these, it's really key to avoid certain kind of issues with browser extensions, and it has worked pretty nicely. We had even used Scala.js for writing Android applications. You can create a progressive web application that is wrapped with a trusted web activity on Android, and then you can get it installed from the Android Play Store. It works. But I am also a friend of people who has used something like Cordova or PhoneGap for writing Android and iOS applications using Scala.js because they support JavaScript. And Slinky also supports React Native. I have never tried it, but I know that there are people that are using it. I had personally been involved with developing SDKs that are cross-compiled to Java, well, to Scala and Scala.js, and they get invoked from Java platforms and as well as from JavaScript platforms or web applications. This also can be useful for browser extensions too. And this works. There is, like I said, just need a compatibility layer and that's it. On the protocol side, you can even use gRPC Web and gRPC for interacting with the Scala.js. And I mention this because one of the common complaints of the gRPC world is that it is a pain to be used from the web or invoked from the browser. The official JavaScript gRPC web library, it's not pretty fun to use. I will just leave it like that. But we have a Scala PV gRPC web, which is a very nice and a smooth experience to actually be used. And it works even better than with JavaScript. So it's another alternative. And we have even tried something crazy, which is invoking a Scala.js code directly from iOS. iOS has a way that allows you to execute JavaScript code. So we actually wanted to see whether we could invoke the SDK from iOS, and turns out that it actually works. It is not very simple, but the experience is not very different to invoking plain JavaScript from iOS, but it works. We didn't pursue this idea because of some other limitations on the execution model on the iOS for JavaScript, but that's outside of the scope for this presentation. So I will even dare to propose a new definition or a new marketing idea for what's a Scala.js, because we saw that official website says that this is for building front-end applications, but the truth is that it is not. Scala.js can be used to build any kind of application or library that can be executed anywhere where you can actually execute JavaScript. There are people that have been running a Scala.js on top of Node.js. Don't ask me why, but they have done it. And there are also people that have executed AWS Lambda functions using Scala.js because they support JavaScript. I'm not sure if this has continued to evolve because now we have GraalVM, but anyway, that's another story. And let's get to the interesting parts, how we use Scala.js at Wiringbits. Well, these are the main libraries that we actually interact with while working at Wiringbits project, but these are not the only ones. I am interested into diving on Slinky and Scalably Typed because these two libraries are the ones that I consider key for the onboarding process that we are using. In the case of Slinky, it's basically a wrapper on top of React.js. And I will bet that everyone will agree that there is a huge number of developers that are already familiar with the JavaScript and React ecosystem. And in this case, Slinky can make those developers feel welcome in the Scala world. And let's see how. Pay attention. I will stop for 30 seconds so that you pay attention to the snippets that I had pasted right here. This one, the one that is on the left, is the official example from the React.js website. And the one on the right is the official example from the Slinky website. Just look at how similar they actually are. Imagine yourself when you are getting into a totally different programming language. If you need to read, if you need to get to learn the language, the paradigm, which is usually functional programming, and you also need to learn the whole world of libraries that are available. Just think about the Scala and the number of libraries that are available for parsing JSON. That's a nightmare. So when you get someone that is already familiar with JavaScript and React, and you tell them to do something like this or to learn something like this, they already know the library. They already know how to use React or how React works and the ecosystem. So it is more appealing for them, at least in our experience, to get something more familiar where they just adapt the syntax, but the knowledge that they already have, it's actually useful. This is another more complicated example, again taken from React website and a Slinky website. The one on the left is JavaScript. The one on the right is Slinky with Scala.js. And similarly to the previous example, the structure is super similar. They are even almost the same number of lines of code involved. This is not usually common, but anyway, I will skip it because it's a little bit more complicated. But anyway, and let's talk about scalably typed, which is another key for interacting with the JavaScript world. Before I had mentioned it that you need to write some kind of compatibility layer or facade for interacting with JavaScript libraries. Well, Scalably Typed can take the TypeScript definitions and translate those to a Scala.js facade or definitions. And it already supports the Slinky flavor so that it outputs something that can be used directly from a Slinky. This is how it looks like at the Builder SVT after adding the plugin, Scalably Typed Converter plugin. I can add a dependency to React Google reCAPTCHA and the type definitions, the TypeScript definitions. This is using a Scala.js bundler, by the way. And having this, Scalably typed will generate the code. So look at the left, how we are using, how reCAPTCHA is being used from TypeScript or JavaScript. And look at the right, how it is being used from Scala.js. We have the same experience. This is pretty similar to how the code looks in JavaScript. Mostly, you just need to learn some conventions like Scalably typed outputs, the TypeScript, the Scala.js definitions and the typings package, and that's it. And there are some changes. For example, this argument is called by a method name, but more or less this is the same. I hope that by now you are getting an idea about why Scala.js can be key to onboarding people directly into Scala. So let me talk briefly about the process that we have been following at Wiringbits. So it involves trainees and it involves a mentor. And with trainees, it's a group of 1 to 3 people that are going to be learning Scala through Scala.js. It is ideal that they have some background with JavaScript or React, but that's not strictly necessary. Over the last year, we have been trying this mostly with juniors and interns, and the results are super nice. You can get the inexperienced people to actually work on the Scala.js code bases, which is something that companies usually companies usually complain about the Scala not being appealing to juniors or interns. It can work. The only constraint that we ask these people or these trainees is that they must be good with at least one programming language, because that will make everything simpler, and that's what we have tried. On the mentor side, it is important that the mentor has a wide experience with the Scala and Scala.js, because the mentor is the one who will be able to guide and unblock the trainees with anything that happens to them that is non-trivial. For example, a trainee doesn't need to bother about learning how SVT works or how do you structure a project. They just need to go and do their work, which is do something on Scala.js. If something non-trivial happens, the mentor is the one that needs to unblock them and make them focus on the actual task. We assign these trainees real world tasks that are low priority, which is important because we don't want to stress them. So it's something like a task that is important that needs to be done, but it doesn't matter the date when it gets done. So we get time for the trainees to actually complete it. Alternative is just give them a toy project. And it's important that the mentor teach these trainees how to work in a team. This is not the Scala related. It's useful for all their career, but given that they will be working at Wiringbits, we need to teach them how we do code reviews, how we integrate the CI, how we wait the checks to pass before merging a pull request, how we address comments, etc., etc. We are preparing some onboarding material that I'm intending to share publicly because it can be useful for the community. So let me get to the trainee steps, which is kind of an algorithm or pseudocode. We start by giving them the task to compile the Scala web application template because it has pretty nice documentation on how to mod your local environment for working with Scala. And this will make sure that even if they do not work on this project, they will have their environment ready, IntelliJ, SVT, Scala, JDK, etc. So they are not going to hit issues, environment-related issues when getting involved in a project. If for any reason the trainee is not comfortable with JavaScript or TypeScript, we are going to ask them to spend some days playing with them. And we do the same with React. Once they are familiar with this, the mentor will be in charge of assigning some learning material that is Scala specific. It can be a book or a video, depending on the trainee. Some people prefer learning by video, some other people prefer learning by books. The goal is that the trainee has some material to keep learning about Scala. Then the trainee can follow the official Scala.js documentation, which is pretty short, and try the onboarding material from Slinky, which is pretty short too, and is mostly translating concepts from React to Slinky. Given that they are already familiar with React, this should not be very difficult to do. The mentor will assign a simple task to the trainee, and the trainee is required to work with the mentor and its peers until the task gets completed. Review cycles, feedback, etc. Usually, all of this happens at their first week, which is pretty nice. From there, we are going to repeat from step 6, which is asking for another simple task, and do this process from a couple of weeks to 1 month until we start assigning them a little bit more complicated tasks. On the data, we have been polishing this process for 3 years. It's not something new. There haven't been potentially so many developers involved, but this is the data. We have tried this with around 10 developers. Initially, we tried onboarding developers directly to Scala. We did that for around 2 years. The process was just too slow and exhausting because of the reason that I mentioned before. When someone gets onboarded into a language where they need to link the language, the syntax, the paradigm, and the libraries, the framework, it can get pretty complicated for them. So let's start by taking advantage of what people most commonly know. Since then, we have tried for around a year onboarding developers directly to Scala.js. And until now, with around 4 to 5 people, we have always got contributions from them at their first week, which is following the steps that I showcased before. And it happens that there are guys that prefer to stay at the front end, which is just doing Scala.js, But something pretty nice from this is that they had been able to navigate through the backend code, which is not something that will happen when they are using just JavaScript. They will just see the Scala backend as a known monster or black box and ask for everything. But front-end developers at Wiringbits actually end up looking into the backend to answer questions themselves. And that's super helpful if you think about productivity and teamwork. On the other side, backend developers now can handle some front-end tasks that are simple, but usually they prefer avoiding to work on styling pages. Eventually, they complain and they want to go back or focus purely on backend. But when necessary, they can now do a little bit of work at front end or do minor fixes or updates when they break something at the front end because they updated the back end. And this is something they can actually do. They can touch the front end, they can navigate the front end, they can understand it, which is pretty nice. This is the whole summary about the process that we are using. We are still polishing it. Like I said, I am preparing videos for onboarding people to the Scala web application template that I'm hoping to make public someday. And that's what I had for today. So thanks a lot.